Manchester, and welcome to another edition of Girard at Large. I am your raindrops keep falling on my head host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook, but no longer Twitter, but Gab, Minds, Codius, MeWe, Tumblr. I know there's a Parlor. There's so many of out there, I forget. Also, at all those sites, YouTube and Rumble. I think I set up a Rumble account now. Anyway, we are ever accessible. And of course, always here on Channel 23. Well, it has been interesting times this past week. A lot going on in the city. We've got a big agenda tonight, including some video, which we're not going to get to right now. Probably won't get to it until at least the middle of the show, but including some video that I think will prove to be disturbing, and even more disturbing will be the response of the city to it. Kind of underscores, I think, the problem we have here in the Queen City with crime and vagrancy and a whole lot of other stuff. It's our permissive, wrong-headed attitude when these things come to pass. All right, as we get started at the top of the show, I am mindful today that September 9th is today. And what's that mean? Oh, well, aside from a couple friends whose birthdays I just remembered, it means September 11th is just 2 days from now. It will be on Saturday, the 20th anniversary. And when we take a look back at the last 20 years, it's amazing how much things have changed in our country. And I'm pretty sure most of it has not been for the better. In any event, many lives were lost, including folks here from the Granite State. And we should now, after 20 years, be able to look back and get some perspective, not only what happened to us as a country, but how we have responded and evolved since. I think there are some hard questions that need to be asked about where we're at today, culturally, civically, and otherwise, and where we're headed. Yes, certainly, while things were contentious in our country before planes crashed into buildings and buildings fell to the ground, killing thousands of people, they have only seemingly become more contentious these days. And, I remember what it was like on September 12th, and not for too long thereafter, when as a country we came together and were united. But it didn't take long for politics to rear its ugly head, and the division we have today, I think, in many ways goes back to those times following 9/11. And so it is with a sense of reflection that I look back anyway on 9/11 and think about what happened then, the lives lost, the lives forever changed, and where we've come as a country. And I think we have a lot of reflection to do on that, and perhaps as we mark the 20th anniversary of those barbaric attacks, maybe people will start to think a little more clearly about what is and is not important and how things should be in these United States. So there it is. And to those whose lives were changed forever because you lost a loved one or a friend, a family member, just know that you remain in our prayers. At this difficult time as we mark this milestone of an anniversary. Okay. Yes. So that having been said, we're off to city business. Yeah. And not for nothing. I'll tell you, going door to door, I can tell you, in my mayoral campaign that I have seen national issues penetrate into the local election that I have never, in a way I've never seen it happen before. And so clearly what's happening to us as a country in many ways is overriding what we're seeing in our local communities. And in some people that's motivating them to pay more attention and get more involved, and other people that is causing them to disengage. So it's hard to judge the overall impact. But I will tell you, the national narratives, at least in my experience going door to door, have found themselves into the local campaign. I am often asked about my party, Not that that's unusual, but I'm asked about it with more frequency and more intensity. And in my flyer, I share what my party is. I have no reason to hide it. I think party affiliation is an important piece of voter education, which is one of the reasons why I oppose our just awful nonpartisan system. But people are asking more now about party, and they're asking with more intensity and more intently. They're asking about defunding the police versus defending the police. They're asking about CRT. They're asking about biological boys competing with biological girls on sports teams and using locker rooms. They really are. And so we've got all of this stuff going on at the national level, and it is impacting us here at the local level. In fact, I heard it so often, I made sure to make my positions known on every questionnaire on those topics, on every questionnaire I've received, every question I've been asked. They ultimately made their way into my flyer, because that's how much I was hearing about it beforehand. And I was right, because my door-to-door has only revealed that more and more people are actually interested in those things, which in some ways have nothing to do with the city, and in some ways have everything to do with the city. So, and I guess that will lead us into our first topic of conversation tonight. The Honorable Carlos Gonzalez, someone who I sort of ran with when I ran for alderman at large back in the late 90s. That's how long I've known Carlos. He was nominated he was elected, I should say, to the school board in Ward 12, filling the balance of the term of Kelly Thomas, who resigned for family and health reasons from the school board. It's not necessarily news that Carlos was elected, but it is because, once again, Democrats on the Board of Aldermen, like Democrats at the state and national levels, are changing all of the rules to try and bully their way into the positions, or bully the community into the positions that they want. I have to tell you, while I generally disagree with Alderman Kavanaugh in Ward 1, I have to tell you, I am extremely disappointed in how he conducted himself over this nomination. Generally speaking, the rule, if you will, is that when a person resigns from the school board, or the seat is vacated for whatever reason, the ward alderman gets to nominate. I mean, anyone technically can nominate a replacement because the Board of Aldermen appoints a replacement for any school board vacancy. But the general protocol, and the way it's been for decades, is that the board defers to the ward alderman in that nomination. I can honestly say I have never seen it in my 30 years where another alderman from another ward has seen fit to nominate somebody to represent a ward that is not their own. And that's exactly what Alderman Kavanaugh from Ward 1, the North End alderman, did to Alderman Hirschman, a West Side alderman. And we all know the divide between the North End and everybody else, but in particular the West Side. So Kavanaugh brought in a fellow, I think his name was Ken Roy, and tried to ram it through on a night that Hirschman wasn't there, because I believe he was actually recovering from a COVID infection. Anyway, the item stayed on the table, and in addition to Mr. Roy, I believe it was Alderman Jim Roy, it was another alderman who nominated Carlos Gonzalez for, or on Alderman Hirschman's behalf. And it was interesting because, Carlos contacted me and asked me if I would appear on his behalf, which I did, as others did. And he spoke himself, and I thought was a very humbling, moving appeal to the board to approve his nomination. And unfortunately, it largely fell on deaf ears of those Democrats that had decided they were going to vote for Ken Roy no matter what. So aside from the breach of protocol, there was a complete disregard, or I should say, inherent in the breach of protocol was an inherent disregard, if not disrespect, for Alderman Hirschman as the representative of the people of Ward 12. And I do have to tip my hat here to Alderman Will Stewart of Ward 2. Nominally, he's an independent. At least that's what it says on the voter registration card. But I think it's fair to say if one takes a look at Will's voting record, they will see that he is a very liberal, if not left-wing alderman who very rarely breaks with the Democrats on the board on anything. And so he did break with the Democrats on the board this time, himself having nominated a school board member during his term, Kathleen Kelly Arnold, who turned out, by the way, to be a really good pick. But that notwithstanding, he observed that protocol. He mentioned that it was something that he was granted when he brought a person in. So did Alderman Shaw. And so with those two Democratic aldermen, the nomination of Carlos Gonzalez passed. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had Bill Berry been present, although the vote would have been 7-6 if he had voted against it. And Stewart, sort of breaking ranks with the people he normally votes with, prevented a tie, which would have caused Joyce Craig to have to decide whether or not she was going to vote for the first Hispanic immigrant to sit on the school board, or she was going to stay with the demands and the orthodoxy of the Democrat Party, which wanted Ken Roy because, in the words of Alderman Kavanaugh, he would help the school board stand strong against school vouchers. So I don't know this for a fact, but I could infer from the comments that Carlos Gonzalez favors parents being able to pick what school options are best for their children, whether they're public charter schools. Now we have education freedom accounts and things like that. I know oftentimes those issues came before the board, whether the board was asked to weigh in on legislation or otherwise address transportation issues for people who send their kids to Catholic school or charter schools here in the city. And there has always been this hardcore opposition to anything that would facilitate people making a choice to send their kids to something other than a Manchester public school. And so Kavanaugh kind of, spilt the beans when he, mentioned that, because it's clear, even though Carlos himself an educator, he's taught high school, he's taught college, he's a very well-educated man, he's bilingual, and excuse me. And he brings a lot. He brings a lot of life experience to that board, but he doesn't favor requiring kids to go to not only just go to the government school, but the school the government says they have to go to because of where they live, and be taught what the government says they have to be taught. Because they're in charge of the curriculum. So that ultimately is what broke down. And the Democrats, Ward Norm Gamache and Ward 11, Dan O'Neill at large, Sapienza. That actually surprised me, because if somebody had nominated anybody in Sapienza's ward other than Sapienza, pretty fair bet that Sapienza would be all bent out of shape over people telling him what he, should and shouldn't do in representing the people of his ward. Jim Roy voted for Carlos Gonzalez. Let me see, who's Ward 3? Pat Long. Now, there's a guy who was appointed to the school board at large, right? Alderman Levasseur made a pretty good point last night about the alderman at large being able to nominate somebody. In disagreeing with the protocol, but he wasn't ready. So here's Pat Long, who, by the way, was nominated politically for one reason and one reason only, and that was to prevent Debbie Langton, the former Ward 2 and former at-large school board member, from being appointed to fill the seat vacated by Nancy Tessier, who resigned for health reasons several years ago. The only person who could stop Debbie from getting the votes was Pat Long, and they didn't want Debbie on the board because Debbie wasn't down for the Joyce Craig, hardcore left-wing Democrat political agenda. And ultimately, I will tell you that vote caused Dr. Vargas to leave. Dr. Vargas was teetering on the edge. She would have stayed had Debbie Langton been there, because Debbie Langton, like myself, while we didn't always agree with Dr. Vargas, worked very well with him. But many of the Democrats on that board, including Katie DeRosier, David Scannell, Joyce Craig, et cetera, did not. And any addition to that side wasn't going to be seen as favorable, and it wasn't. And point of fact, Pat Long, even though there were times he said he agreed with the position other than the way he voted, never once cast a vote that was any different than what the mayor cast. Never once. So we know why Pat was there, and it was to cover her flank. But Carlos ultimately was approved on a vote of, I believe it was 7-5. And that's a good thing for the school board. But the sad part is that they didn't care about Carlos's background or education or his ability to interact with Hispanic families or immigrant families. They cared about his position on, quote, school vouchers. And that just makes Carlos the wrong kind of minority, just like Mary Georges was the wrong kind of minority. She was the kind of minority that didn't agree with the white liberals on policy pronouncements. She was able, as Carlos is able, to think for themselves and come to a conclusion that may or may not be different than what the white liberals expect these immigrants of color to be. And I'm saying that in all sincerity because, we remember, it's nice to hear people like Joyce Craig talk about diversity and all that fun stuff on the board, and we need to have more of it. But when the time came to support Mary Georges for re-election, she didn't. And, white liberal racists like David Scannell didn't. The same David Scannell whose wife sent a scathing letter to Mary Georges after she opposed having students on the school board. That was the wrong position for a person of color because the YOU group from Granite State Organizing Project, they were the ones that were pushing that, and they were all students of color, and that's what they wanted. So Mary, being of the same color and of the same racial or ethnic origin of them, coming from various parts in Africa, was supposed to vote for them, and they didn't. So all of these white liberals who claim that diversity is their big thing opposed Mary Georges' reelection in favor of the white liberal Carol Sewell, another old white liberal on the board. And she won by a mere, I think, 10 votes over Mary Georges. So now we see this play out again with Carlos Gonzalez, another person who is diverse, based at least on their skin color, but he's the wrong kind of diverse. He's what, what's her name? Ayanna Pressley, that member of the squad down in Congress, right? The Boston area congresswoman. Yeah, she said, we don't need brown mouths speaking with white tongues, right? Right, because you're not allowed in the world of the white liberal to have an opinion that's different than the white liberal if you are a racial or ethnic minority. And so now we've seen that play out, sadly, twice on the board. It has nothing to do with their merits as individuals, has nothing to do with their qualities, the qualities of their candidacies, the content of their character. Nope. They don't think along the white liberal line, and there you have it. So Carlos was opposed by Kavanaugh and the rest of them, but they pulled up short, and Carlos Gonzalez now represents Ward 12. So there's that. There's a lot of trouble with the reval. As you folks know, I did on this show last week a tutorial. I gave you slides. It's up at GirardForMayor.com. It's on my Facebook pages at Girard at Large and Girard for Mayor, although there have been a lot of other posts, so you have to scroll down. But it's funny because when I put that video up on various pages on Facebook, I had many people say that I got the math wrong. It couldn't be right. And I walked him through the math, and it's right. And here are some things that you need to understand that we didn't cover last week. But there are people, when I was out door knocking this weekend, it was clear to me that the reval had hit home. Because honestly, up until this point, I have not heard a lot from residents about spending and taxes. I've heard an awful lot about our awful homeless vagrancy problem and the crime problems in the city. That has been universal at nearly every door that I've knocked on. And believe me, I've knocked on a few. I could show you my knuckles. But this past weekend, now that the reval is all the talk of the city, people are hot about this reval. And we have seen as I predicted back in December, and you can get that article at girardformayor.com as well. I believe it's the first one in the news section, so you're going to have to go all the way back to page 1. But I predicted there was going to be a massive shift away from the commercial industrial base, a massive shift in the tax burden, I should say, away from the commercial industrial base and toward the residential base. And sure enough, it was a massive shift. And people are going to feel it, because in the tax bill that will come out this fall, okay, in that tax bill, you're going to see, if you're seeing a tax increase, you're going to have to pay all of that in one shot. Okay, it's not like it's going to get spread out over the next 2 tax bills, because the bill you get this year will be the final tax bill of the tax year for the year that we're just finishing. So it's a little complicated, because we have a calendar year, a fiscal year, and we have a tax year. And the tax year runs from April 1 to March 31. And that's how your tax bills are, that's the basis of your tax bills being sent out. So the second bill, there's a fellow, I won't use his last name, but there's a fellow named Ralph who posted literally, I think, under every post that I published with that video about how my numbers have to be wrong. There's just something not adding up. So I walked through the numbers with him, and finally he came to see that my numbers were exactly right. And he's looking at a $900 to $1,000 tax increase. And that's before they calculate the impact of the budget, which hopefully will be done before the election. We heard from the assessor at the meeting this past Tuesday, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting this past Tuesday. We heard from the assessor that while not optimal, if directed to do so, the city could file all of the paperwork it needed with the state by the middle of October, so that the tax rate, which would include the increase from the budget that they passed, would be out before the election. And so there are a couple things here that are important. I won't go over last week's show again. You can get it at girardformayor.com. And I would encourage you to go there, because I very succinctly laid out the math and how it works, so you can just figure out what your own tax bill is going to be. But take your new assessment and multiply it by $17.61, because that's what the tax rate is after you adjust for the overall 40% increase in value of the tax base, okay? That will tell you what your new tax bill is going to be, and yeah, you're going to have to pay that entire increase on top of, or in addition to, the increase you'll see because of the budget in December or November, if we can get the tax bills out the door quick enough. The mayor, of course, and several of the aldermen were, oh, no, we don't want to do that. We can't do that. I mean, well, listen to the assessor tell us why that can't be done. Well, the assessor didn't say why it couldn't be done. The assessor said it would be preferable to have them out by November, have the paperwork filed with the state by November 1, which means the tax bills wouldn't come out until afterward. But the assessor very clearly said that while they wouldn't, there would be some loose ends they may not get to tie up, they certainly could file the paperwork with the state in mid-October, so that the tax bill could come out before the election. So it can be done. And, the Democrats' ideas here are astounding. Former Alderman Mike Porter has been posting up on Facebook changes to what commercial property values have been. Now, commercial property went up. Industrial property went up, but they went up nowhere near the amount that residential property went up, okay? And because of that, right, there's a shift. So even though their values went up, okay, they went up by much less than the tax rate went down, which means they are going to pay less in taxes even though they have a higher value than they had beforehand. Because the residentials went up so much higher, they're going to be responsible now for paying more of the tax burden. And it was a big change. So he's been posting some properties that are going to be paying less in taxes as a result of the revaluation. And good old Kathy Sullivan, former chairman of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, friend, political advisor, and confidant of Mayor Joyce Craig, I brought this up at the meeting, in response to people who were sharing their anxiety, their concerns, their fears over the massive increase that some of them are going to have in taxes as a result of this reval, posted a comment on Facebook that said, "If you want cheap real estate, move to Coos County. Very pretty up there. We'll miss you, but you'll be happier." Now, I brought that to Mayor Craig's attention at the board meeting on Tuesday night because I thought it was relevant to the overall discussion, and I challenged the mayor or asked her politely. I said, "I hope you're not going to let this comment from a known political ally of yours stand. It's wholly inappropriate for that kind of comment when people, especially our senior citizens, are who've been in their homes for a long time, are really going to bear the brunt of this revaluation." Of course, Mayor Craig has said nothing about it because the Democrats won't throw their own under the bus. The Republicans, of course, are, in my opinion, a little too quick to do that, even when it's not warranted. But there we have it. The Democrats out there, and Jim O'Connell is out there saying some harebrained stuff too, arguing with people over whether or not their taxes are going up. I'm not sure he quite understands the process, but oh well. There it is. So, yeah, move if you don't like how expensive it is. That reminds me of what our good friend Chris Herbert said not too long ago in a re-election campaign, basically telling senior citizens that they needed to sell their houses and move into something smaller or out of the city so that young families could move in and pay more taxes for the schools. Remember that? Yeah, he survived that election, but yeah, you're talking about the elderly neighbor with the $300,000. It didn't exist at the time, just saying. But okay, so we have that. Now the question comes as to what to do about the revaluation, and I have to tell you, I'm a little perplexed, right? Because as you know, we have exemptions for senior citizens, property tax exemptions for senior citizens, and for people who are disabled. Okay. And then we have a tax credit for veterans. That's kind of a different thing. But basically, the exemption is a reduction in the property tax value of seniors of a certain economic status and the disabled. And so it basically exempts, that's why it's called an exemption, the first, I think, $109,000 in value on your property, and you pay full property taxes on the rest. Well, anybody with open eyes could see that there was going to be a huge shift toward the residential as a result of this revaluation. I mean, residential was hot before COVID. It went on fire after COVID. And I'll tell you, I've seen this too, right? I've gone as I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of door to door. I have met all kinds of folks who are new to the city. And I asked them why they moved here. And the answer, pretty universal. Well, I wanted to get out of Boston, New York, fill in the blank of whatever city. And the housing prices here in Manchester are much cheaper than anything I could find in Massachusetts or New York or wherever else. Okay, so people were moving here because the housing is cheap. Now, we look at it, we're horrified by it because it's gone up so much. But compared to where they come from, it's cheap. And so we knew this was going to happen, right? So why didn't the city leadership take action so that when it came out, there was a plan in place? So there could have been a plan in place to increase the exemption for senior citizens and the elderly. Okay. Even if it was a preliminary vote that said, we will increase the exemption at a minimum by the overall increase in the value of the tax base. They could have done that. They didn't. And if they had done that, they would be able to say, at least to seniors of a certain socioeconomic demographic and the disabled that, hey, we got you covered. This is what we're going to do. We know it's coming. We're prepping you for it. And if we need to do more after this, we'll be in a position to be able to do it. But they did none of that. And that's something that should have done. I mean, in the article I wrote back in December, I called on the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to do something. I said, they're going to have to do something to address this. I didn't spell it out for them, but, honestly, when I ran for mayor 20 years ago, I actually proposed what I'm about to share with you. Not exactly what I just said, but they could have and they should have had a contingency plan in place to take care of the most vulnerable people that we have right now. And those are elderly on fixed incomes who've been in their homes for a long time and have seen the hardest hit from this reval and the whatchamacallit and the disabled. Now, there also is a question of how you can prevent this from happening in the future, right? And without getting too complicated, there's something called an equalization ratio that we have in our property tax system. And what the equalization ratio says is, okay, right now, your property, according to city tax records, let's just say it's worth $100,000, okay? And as time goes on, property sells. People buy and sell property. So if the average value of a property is being sold for, let's say, 20% more than the assessed value of the similar property, then the equalization ratio goes down, all right? So an equalization ratio of less than 100 means that properties are selling for more than what they're assessed by. So if the ratio is 80%, then on average, the properties are selling for 20% more than what they're assessed for. Conversely, if property values are coming down, and we haven't seen that really since the 90s, back in the days when I used to do city budgets, you think it's tough doing budgets now, try doing budgets at a time when your property tax base is imploding because the savings and loan debacle flooded the market with real estate that no one could buy because there were no loans. And I think we had something like a 30, maybe 40% decrease in the overall property tax value of the property tax base. Yeah, that was fun. So what ends up happening in those cases where the properties are selling for less than they're valued at is the ratio goes over 100. Okay, so if you know that ratio is designed to try to keep some balance and equity in the property tax system in between revals, then you understand that as the ratio lowers, property values are selling on average for that much more than they're assessed for. And if the ratio goes over 100, that means they're selling for that much less. So 20 years ago, because oddly enough, there was a reval 20 years ago during a mayoral campaign, and we're going to see that every so often because the revals are mandated by state law to be to happen not more than every 5 years, right? You can do one every year if you want, but you can't go more than 5 years without doing a revaluation. Well, I put out a proposal earlier this week that basically said, a good way to avoid this in the future is to look at that equalization ratio and have it be a trigger. So if the equalization ratio falls below 85% or goes above 115%, that should trigger the city to do a new revaluation. At that point in time, not wait another year, 2 years, 3 years, or however long they have to wait before they do the revaluation, but to do it when the equalization ratio falls below 85 or goes above 115. Because if you do that, you start reassessing property and seeing what the balance between residential, commercial, industrial, and all that fun stuff is on a more frequent basis. That means any shift in any direction, by definition, is going to be less severe than if you wait till where it got to here, and that was under 80%. I think it was around 70. It might even been lower. Before you do it. So the more tightly controlled, or the more tightly controlled when you do the revals is based on that equalization ratio, the less upset that you will have overall in your tax base. You will not see, as a general rule, these massive spikes or massive shifts in any direction if you're revaluing within a certain framework. And so it makes sense to me to do that. And as mayor, you can trust that I will put in place those things that are necessary to do that. And that way you can avoid these horrific spikes. And on the city side of it, frankly, if we're in a downward cycle, you want the city to be able to avoid, a horrific fall off, because that just means the city's going to have to spike the tax rate. Just like the tax rate came down 40% because the value of the base went up 40%. If the value of the base had gone down, your tax rate would have gone up 40%. And who wants that? Now, does that mean everybody's going to pay 40% more? Nope, but it does mean, the way revals work, that there is going to be a category of properties that's really going to take it in the teeth. And if you are in that category, that's not good. So we've got to change the threshold at which we do these things. And in changing the threshold, we take the spikes away, and that's good for every property taxpayer. It also happens to be good for the city, because ultimately, too, that stabilizes the tax rate, okay? Because the more tightly controlled it is, right, the more defined the parameter in which you're making those changes, there's only so much that the tax rate can go up or down if you're revaluing the property every so often based on when the equalization ratio triggers a reval. I hope that's clear. If it's not, go to girardformayor.com. I know it's really clear in paper because I can spend the time in paper to spell it out really clearly. And I hate reading to you on TV. I probably should have done that, but there we go. All right. Speaking of TV, okay, this is the revaluation story. I don't need that. So I saw this story today in the Union Leader, and residents on notice, state to clear homeless camp near I-293. It boggles my mind that they're calling these vagrants residents of homeless camps, but okay. And I am going to read this to you, and then I'm going to show you a video. Because between these two things and another story I got while I was going door to door about a police response to a situation, I think underscores why the city is having so much trouble with crime and homelessness. All right. So eviction notices went up Tuesday at one of the larger homeless camps in Manchester, a tent city sandwiched between the Merrimack River and Interstate 293, where some estimates put the number of residents near 40. If state officials follow through, it will be the first forcible clearing of a homeless camp in the city since June. Stephen Blaze, one of the residents, said Wednesday that camp occupants are talking about holding a protest in downtown. I want the city to do something for us. Tell us where we can go so we don't cause problems. As if the outreach teams don't do that over and over again, said Blaze, who has lived in the camp since April. Signs warn that as of next Tuesday, anyone camping on the property will be breaking the law. They're breaking the law now, and their property will be removed and thrown away if it remains on site, which it almost always does, because wherever they set up shop, they've got all these social service agencies and other people that bring them all the stuff they need to be comfortable in their camp. State Department of Safety spokesman Paul Raymond said the notices were posted at the request of the city. Local service providers have already begun visiting the site to offer emergency housing and medical services, he said in a statement. As of today, no individual at the encampment has accepted an emergency bed. And they're not going to, because they don't like the rules that come with the shelters and the beds, though they blame the shelters for being unsavory, unsafe, or anything else. Department of Health and Human Services spokesman Jake Leon said the services will continue to be offered up to the September 14 deadline. The city of Manchester asked the state to clear the encampment due to safety concerns, as reaching the encampment is only possible by crossing I-293. Leon said in a statement. One part of the camp is closer to the 2nd Street Highway entrance, the other to the Merrimack River. The camp is near the highway features an orderly site. You got to understand something about Mark Hayward, who's the reporter on this. He doesn't think these camps should be brought down. He doesn't think the illegal sober homes should be closed down. So he always writes these things in the light most favorable to the residents of these illegal establishments. The camp near the highway features an orderly site with a main walkway delineated by lawn fencing and plants, some artificial and some real. Tents faced out onto a rug-covered walkway, a front door, like front doors to a street. A screen tent was put up for bug-free dining, and a security camera hung from a tree. I wonder where they're getting the power. Sandra Ma Alicia said she spends most of the day keeping the place neat. It started with about a dozen residents and has grown to 35 or 40. With the growth has come problems such as drug use, theft, and rowdiness, she said. I have no choice, she said, about where to live. She said she said her disability income makes it difficult to find a place to live. And recently, one landlord wanted her to quarantine because of COVID concerns. Just a few days earlier, social workers were talking about delivering a portable toilet, she said. Yeah, nothing says go away like putting a portable toilet there. But then on Tuesday, state troopers pounded in stakes with the notices. The camp, nicknamed Econo Camp because of its proximity to Econo Lodge, is on state land, which means the removal may be reminiscent of the high-profile clearing of a homeless camp on the Hillsborough County courthouse by state police last November. Yeah, that's the one where the mayor for months demanded the governor get rid of it. And when he did, she accused him of being cruel and inhumane and opposed its removal. By contrast, the city of Manchester's latest approach, problem number 2 in here. By contrast, the city of Manchester's latest approach calls for allowing small camps to remain as long as they don't generate complaints and don't pose a health or safety standard, according to the city's top official overseeing homeless programs. If there are 1 or 2 tents and they keep it clean and they're not bothering anybody, we're not bothering them, said Shauna Green, the city director of homeless initiatives. So like the ordinance change they made to the definition of family to make it easier for the sober homes to exist, apparently it's okay to break the law as long as there's only 2 or 3 people doing it, and not 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 or whatever arbitrary number comes up before it's considered to be a problem. Because apparently it wasn't a problem here, even though there were 12 or 15 people that grew to 35 or 40. And by the way, these things don't tend to stay in isolation. They tend to grow. So it's okay, according to the Homeless Initiatives director, or whatever she is, to have random people scattered throughout random pieces of property, private, public, or otherwise, as long as they're not bothering anyone. It's okay to break the law as long as you're not bothering anyone. Got it. There are about 20 such sites across the city, she said. Those are your future hazard spots. But she said the Econo camp had generated many complaints and was not safe. The encampment over there was there being near the highway. It's got to go. Well, what were people complaining about? I know what they were complaining about because people were telling me I should go take pictures of it. Anyway, she said the city is operating under a new plan, Housing Options Promote Empowerment, which the city website describes as including emergency shelters, transitional housing, and permanent housing. Kelly McAndrew, a former homeless woman who has become an activist, said the 15 to 20 residents were benefiting from daily visits by outreach workers. Evicting them from the site will disrupt their lives, throwing them off regularly scheduled medication for mental health or drug addiction, she said. So we're bringing them medication for mental health and drug addiction while they're in the homeless camps. And we wonder why they won't go to a facility where they can get their medication, their treatment, their checkups, their food, and have a place to lay their head down. We keep bringing everything they want to the camp, and now we're just leaving the camps alone as long as it's, a few people that's not bothering anybody. And we're expecting this problem to go away. That will lead them to a resumption of bad habits and crime, McAndrew said. I don't understand why they're doing this. Is it because the city election's coming up? She said. Well, I'll answer that. Yeah, Mayor Craig has shown in her past 2 terms that homelessness is an issue on her plate when it's election time. She did it in 2019. She's doing it again now. Up until now, there was no movement whatsoever to try to crack down on this. So when you read this, okay, so the city's approach is to make it okay. It's okay. You can hang out. Just don't be too many and don't be too loud about it. Don't generate any complaints, and we'll leave you alone. And you wonder why people come to the city when they're homeless. And why do I say that? Well, I can point to multiple articles, and if you go to my plan to crack down on homeless vagrancy at girardformayor.com, you'll see that I chronicled months and months and months of newspaper stories on the topic, including including stories that told us how many homeless were out there. And at the time, there were more than 400, and I think that was an undercount. And in those stories, they admit that 3 out of every 4 homeless people on our streets are not from our city. They come from all over the place. And you ask why. Well, I think you have an answer as to why. We leave them alone until they get to a point where, I don't know, my guess is that the next one to go to feel the wrath of Mayor Craig will be the one that is attached to the east side of the Merrimack River along the granite wall there, just south of Arms Park. Right. Alderman Hirschman brought that up, and the mayor's response was, well, report it to Shauna Green, our homeless initiatives director. What, suddenly the mayor is no longer responsible for this? It's all the homeless directors, homeless initiatives director, whatever she is. She is the point person determining which camps stay, which camps go. The policy that says, hey, as long as 2 or 3 of you are not bothering anybody, we're gonna ignore the laws that say you can't be where you are and do what you do because you're not bothering anybody. Huh. Right. All right. This leads us to the video I want to share with you. Now, one of the problems we have in the city is graffiti. And, a citizen, a supporter of mine actually, gave me this video. He and his wife were bike riding on the Piscataquog River Trail. And you'll see in the video that the wife actually hits a great big cinder block that was put in the middle of the bikeway. Turns out, according to these folks, that one of the latest schemes is that homeless folks, and if you look carefully, I'll try to catch it and have Kyle pause the video. You can see the silhouette of a homeless guy in the woods near where this cinder block was put. Apparently what's happening is they're putting these obstacles in the way, hoping that cyclists or joggers or whatnot don't see them, hit them, fall over, and then they're being robbed. That's not the purpose of this video. It's just something that we learned as a result of catching it. But what we caught were some hoodlums vandalizing one of the tunnels underneath an overpass. So Kyle, let her roll. So there you see they're biking. This is Piscataquog River Trail. You see them there spray painting. Did a lot of graffiti. Oh, you just saw her hit the thing. Okay. He stops, pulls the bike over, and that right there. You see in the back, there it is. You see his silhouette through the leaves. See him? All right. Good job, Kyle. So keep going forward. Now he takes his phone. And there's no audio here because to audio record would be a violation of state law. New Hampshire's a 2-party consent. But you can video because when you're in a public place, you have no expectation of privacy. So he gets them to look at the camera, every single one of them. He gets them to look at the camera. And we have pictures of their face that we will show after. So we want to make them famous. Okay? Now, they get spooked because they know they've just put on camera, and there they go. They start to leave. Now, we could go through the video again, and we could show you all of the graffiti that they put up there. See, there they go. Boom, boom. And here comes the other one. So all 4 of them are now gone. Okay. I think the video comes to an end. Do you have the pictures, Kyle? Let's put up the pictures. So here are the faces. Now, this is important. Okay. So next picture. So we know who these people are. He got them all on camera. And I don't know if he took the pictures from the video or he shot them while they were driving by. You can bring it back to me. So here's why I showed you that. He called the police. And police officer came. He didn't give me this video, but he had a video of himself talking to the police officer on the porch. And similarly, it didn't have any audio, although I believe, talking to a police officer in the conduct of their duty, you can record that. They don't have to give consent. So what the police officer told him was, he showed him the video, showed him the still shots, everything. He's like, okay, good. Now you can go get them. And what the police officer told him was, and I'm not faulting the cop, okay? This to me, what you're about to hear, to me is not the individual cop on the street. It's the leadership, it's the political leadership of the city, and it's the leadership of the department. And that's an important distinction to make, because the guy on the street who goes to meet with the citizen that shows something like this is following the policy directives that the department has given, which the department may have given on its own or may have given as a result of an action of the mayor or of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So we'll need to figure this out. So what the officer told the person who gave me this video and the pictures was this, that even if there was something the city could do about it, the police could do about it, they would not do anything about it. Confused, the citizen said, "What?" And he was told, well, they graffitied public property and there was no damage. It's no big deal. The city will just go paint it over. That was the response of your police department, which I believe is not the decision of the individual police officer, but a decision of either the department or the mayor to say, even if we could do something, we wouldn't. So that got me thinking, because one of the things in my crime plan and in my homeless vagrancy plan that I chronicle are the many city ordinances that could be enforced to address these problems. And Section 99 of our Code of Ordinances, okay, 99.01, Purpose and Intent. The purpose and intent of this chapter is to establish means to prevent, prohibit, and remove graffiti from structures and surfaces on public and private property in the city. It doesn't say anything about whether or not there was damage or if it was making it okay if it could just be painted over. And public land is specifically mentioned here. So the idea that because it's on city property, there's nothing the police could do is bull caca. Let me read to you. The Board of Mayor and all, okay, it goes through a whole lot. Prohibited conduct. No person may apply graffiti to any surface. Oh, this is the same police department, by the way, that lost its mind when the guys from, was it copblock.org several years ago, went and drew pictures on the old police station using chalk. Now, chalk, you can just blow away or, use a hose and wash it away. But they were arrested for defacing public property, graffitiing public property using chalk. My, how times change. No person may apply graffiti to any surface or structure on public or private property within the city. No person shall possess any graffiti implement with the intent to violate the provision of Division A. And it goes through all kinds of things about spray paint and everything else. Penalty. Any person violating any provision of this chapter shall be guilty of a violation and may be subject to a fine of up to $1,000. A separate offense shall be deemed committed each day during or on which the violation occurs or continues. This ordinance was passed January 19th, 1999. That means as an alderman, I voted on it. But according to the police officer that went to visit the person who showed him the video and the pictures that I just shared with you, ain't nothing can be done because it was on city property and there was no damage. I'm sorry, my plain English reading of the ordinance has nothing to do with whether or not it's on city property, although it specifically says on public or private property. It has nothing to do with, was there damage that can be covered by it? You can't do it. And it is this permissive attitude of this city that is replayed over and over and over again that allows this kind of crime to explode, cause our quality of life to deteriorate, and enable more crime, more serious crime to happen. It's the whole broken windows theory, and Manchester has got it backwards. And we need to change that. And as mayor, I'll be committed to it. And a story I picked up walking in the South End is similar. This woman, I won't say where, but I will say that several of the women at this beauty salon who rented chairs have now left because they feel unsafe. But there have been occasions where homeless folks have entered the building where they have their business. And just, made it unpleasant. I really don't want to go into the details here on TV. Let's just say that they were doing things inside the building that, they shouldn't really be doing anywhere. The police were called, and the police told the business owner that there was nothing they could do because they didn't have the property posted with no loitering signs. Now, we're talking about the inside of the property. We're not talking about hanging out on the sidewalk. We're not even talking about hanging out in their parking lot. We're talking about inside the building. And folks, I have heard from business owners a lot, along Kelly Street on the west side. I've heard from people all over the city as I've talked to them about their concerns over and over and over again. It is the nothing we can do response to these crimes. I mean, one of the business owners I talked to on Kelly Street was all about how they were defecating in and around his trash barrels and in the alleyway behind his building. And even though security cameras picked up who it was, they could see who it was. And we get the shrug of the shoulders, say, there's nothing we can do. Folks, it's not right. There is something we can do. And until we do it, these problems are going to continue like acid to rot the foundations of our neighborhoods in this city. It's unacceptable. It's not tolerable. And the genesis of this attitude has got to be discovered and corrected. And when a citizen, or anybody else for that matter, turns this material over to the police damn well better do something about it. And until they do, we're going to continue to have these problems, and people are going to continue to leave our city. And that's not good for you, me, or any of the other 115,000 people that live here. I am your ever humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, be good, be well. Don't do anything we wouldn't do. We're proud to have you in the audience. Thanks for being there. GirardforMayor.com, where you can get more on all of the stuff we talked about today and then some. Until next week, be good.